Okay, you guys remember receptors, okay, on cells, all right? And the receptors have these different names, like an alpha receptor or a beta receptor or something to that effect, okay? Depending on what target cell you might be talking about, okay? Now, we have that, what we think of as the epi, okay? Then we have that chemical that we think of as norepinephrine. So if we have, let's say for example, an alpha and a beta receptor, two types of receptors. Epinephrine can work on both receptors. Norepi only works on one. Okay? Now, don't want you to get into great detail about that. But the one thing about these receptors, like an alpha and a beta, the one thing about them, these alpha, they are only found on arteries, blood flow. Okay? So, that tells me epinephrine can affect that blood flow. What is it that our sympathetic nervous system did to the body? Justin? Stimulated. It prepared it for the fight or flight. Does everybody remember that? So, epinephrine, it has the glucose sparing effect. We talked about that, right? How it would let, for example, if the sympathetic nervous system is getting the body ready, that means we're pushing blood flow, for example, to our skeletal muscles. Skeletal muscles have to get ready to either fight or flee, okay? To get the energy to do that, rather than using glucose, it would use, like for example, fat cells, like the fat that might be available. Does everybody remember that? Mm-hmm. Because what would be getting the glucose?
Nervous system.
My nervous system. Because the only nutrient that it can use is glucose. So my epinephrine would allow these cells to have alternative fuels. This lets my blood glucose go mostly to the brain. All right? So now, we actually need one for the other. Did y'all know that? We need norepi for the epi. Okay? Now, the only one norepi will work on is my beta. Alpha's only on my arteries, okay? But the beta, beta is found, for example, heart, lungs. Do y'all see where I'm going with this? Because what has to happen to these for that to work?
Heart rate and respiration.
Heart rate increases, respiration increases. So we need one for the other. This one is in less amounts than this one. This one will always be in higher amounts. For the most part, it should be. Okay? So, this norepinephrine, it can trigger what we know as vasoconstriction. Vaso means vessels. Constriction making them smaller, what that's going to do, that is going to actually help increase blood pressure. So this will help the epi with the contraction strength of muscles, for example, for the fight or flight. It's almost the pre to the epi so that the epi can make the body flee or fight. Okay? So epi, norepi. The one thing about norepinephrine, with norepinephrine, they can actually use this to treat people who are in situations where their blood pressure is dangerously low. For example, maybe they're in shock, maybe there's been trauma, okay? Usually in situations where that blood pressure has dropped quickly, they can use norepinephrine to help bring blood pressure back up in the clinical settings. Now, dopamine. This is our precursor of this adrenaline and noradrenaline. And yeah, the functions too numerous to even discuss. If you were going into the neuro world, we would look at those, but for our purposes, it's just way, way too much. So that is what's going to happen with my medulla for this sympathetic nervous system. Now, what about all of this area right here, the cortex? Well, it's interesting, to say the least. This one produces corticosteroids. Corticoids. How about that? Ever heard of that? Now, when we hear about corticosteroids, what do we tend to think about? Okay, you're thinking about inflammation, because a lot of times people who might have the joint pain or something like that, the first thing they'll do is they'll want to do the steroid shot. Okay? So you're thinking about inflammation, which we're finding a lot of different physiological problems that we have are related to inflammation now in the body. That's why they're so big on like anti-inflammatory diets and so forth. In this part of this adrenal gland, in this cortex region, we're going to see everything that gets produced. Do you guys remember cholesterol? Okay? When we hear cholesterol, we tend to have a negative thought. Okay? You tend to think of your doctor saying you've got high cholesterol, or you've got a lot of the good cholesterol, bad cholesterol, whatever the case might be. This is the cholesterol that's, of course, natural in the body, and it's a building block, okay? We're going to see that we have, what we know of currently are 5 of these corticosteroids. There are 3 categories, and guess what? 3 layers of the cortex. So the way that we look at this, we're going to have, let me get mine. I knew I should have brought them out here with me, but I didn't. we're going to have 3 layers. 1, 2, 3. An outer, a middle, and inner. They're termed zonas. A zone, okay? And somebody kind of got inventive in lab that day and said, well, let's have the zona glomerulosa. Okay, all right. That term, okay, is going to come back to us when we talk about the kidneys. Okay, I wish they would have had another term. Zona fasciculata, fascicles. Okay, zona reticularis. Do you guys remember the reticular fibers from part 1? So I have 1, 2, 3 zones. The outer, the middle, the inner. So my outer layer, that glomerulosa, my middle layer, fasciculata, the inner layer, reticularis. And when you look at a cross section under the scope, you literally see 1, 2, 3 different layers. They have very different structure, but they're all in this one portion, which is kind of cool. Now, in this outer layer, the category that exists is mineralocorticoids. GM. Mineralocorticoids. What does that make you think about? Minerals. When you hear the term minerals, what do you think about in the body? That's sort of what I would think about. I would associate it with that. These, the pluses and the minuses. Okay? Therefore, the production from this layer of the cortex is focused on electrolytes. The most important, aldosterone. So electrolytes, that stuff that we think about having the pluses and the minuses. The middle portion, my fasciculata. Fasciculata, middle, glucocorticoids, FG. What does that hopefully make you think about?
Sugar.
Sugar. This one is going to help with the metabolism of glucose and other organic fuels. What would that include? Now, what else can be used in the body besides glucose to make that ATP? That's okay, because now you're thinking. So, we tend to think of that glucose going through that cellular respiration to make the ATP. But what else can go through